Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Ásatrú for Beginners, A Modern Heathen's Guide to the Ancient Northern Way, by Dr. Mathias Nordvig, narrated by David Marantz. Publisher's Note: this audiobook refers to appendices and tables included in the print and e-book editions of the book. Welcome to Ásatrú. Defined by the belief in the ancient Norse gods, Ásatrú is also referred to as heathenry, and its practitioners are called heathens. Ásatrú is a modern neo-pagan belief that has its foundation in the pre-Christian religions of Scandinavia and Northern Europe. Although the Nordic countries converted to Christianity some 1,000 years ago, many of the old ideas, beliefs, and myths about the Norse gods lived on. They were written down in Iceland and elsewhere in Scandinavia in the medieval period from about 1100 to 1500 CE. Modern Ásatrú was coined as a belief and way of life in the 19th century, but only became well known and practiced in Europe and North America in the 1970s. Since then, Ásatrú has become a popular modern spirituality with established communities across the world, especially in Europe and North America. In the Scandinavian countries, Ásatrú has become the fastest-growing spirituality. In Iceland, Ásatrú is the country's largest non-Christian belief community, with some 3,000 registered heathens of the country's 320,000 people. In the United States of America, the number of heathens is difficult to capture and count, but I estimate that it is in the tens of thousands. There are many reasons that it is hard to reach an accurate number. One reason is that many heathens do not organize in large, open groups. They tend to gather in smaller groups, with family or friends. One thing is for sure, though. Today, Ásatrú is practiced and celebrated all over the world. As a Danish national and scholar of Norse mythology, I too am a heathen. In fact, I was raised by heathen parents. Born in Denmark, I spent a good part of my childhood in Greenland, but I have also lived in Iceland and frequently visited Norway and Sweden throughout my life. Over the years, I've met personal friends from heathen communities all over the world, from Argentina in the south to Canada in the north, from New Zealand in the east to California in the west. I have taken part in rituals with heathens in the rolling Danish hills, the Swedish forests, the Norwegian fjords, the Bavarian Alps, the wind-blown shores of Iceland, the plains of the American Midwest, and especially the Rocky Mountains, where I have lived for many years now. Growing up with Norse mythology as a fundamental part of my Scandinavian culture and a part of my family's spirituality, it was natural for me to study it in college. Since I finished my Ph.D. on Norse mythology in 2014, I have proudly taught at the university level on the Vikings, Norse mythology, and other Scandinavian subjects. With Ásatrú for Beginners, I look forward to sharing nearly 40 years of heathen experience with you. My hope is that this book will serve as an illuminating and empowering introduction for you if you believe in or are interested in the Norse gods. In the chapters that follow, you will encounter a solid history of Ásatrú and the pre-Christian religions of Scandinavia. You will learn about how the modern heathen movements came into existence and what this modern spirituality is all about. Ásatrú is a free spirituality without dogma, and this guide is just one perspective on what heathens believe. Throughout this book, I have done my best to represent the global heathen community as accurately as possible, while adding my own personal knowledge based on my many years as a heathen and a professional scholar. With this in mind, I invite you on a journey to learn more about the ancient ways of heathenism. Chapter 1. What is Ásatrú? Ásatrú is a modern spirituality based in the traditions, folklore, and mythology of Northern Europe, and particularly Scandinavia. About 1,000 years ago, Scandinavians and other peoples in Northern Europe converted to Christianity, but for many, the gods and spirits of the old pre-Christian religions were still important. People continued to tell stories about them, and in some ways continued to venerate them. Eventually, some of the stories about the ancient gods and spirits were written down by historians and antiquarians who were interested in preserving knowledge about the past. These texts have since been used in modern times to revive a spirituality centered around the Norse gods. Understanding Ásatrú. Ásatrú is a modern Icelandic word that was originally used by Danish scholars in the 19th century when referring to the pre-Christian religion in Scandinavia. In its Danish and Swedish forms, it is spelled Asatro, and in Norwegian it is spelled Oasatru. The Scandinavians all pronounce the word differently, but in English, the Icelandic way of saying it would phonetically sound like Ásatrú. The word is a combination of the Norse word ás, God, spirit, plural, æsir, and the word trú, belief. Ásatrú means belief in the æsir, and people who believe in the æsir can be referred to as ásatrúar, with the Icelandic plural suffix ar at the end of the word. The word came into use in the English language, especially in the United States, in the 1970s, under influence from Iceland. In modern English, most heathens use it in the sense belief in the æsir, but some also emphasize trust in the æsir. Ásatrú, heathen or pagan. There's an old Scandinavian saying, "A beloved child has many names." This is certainly true in the case of modern Norse-based spirituality. Ásatrú is just one way that people who believe in the Norse gods refer to themselves. Some groups shy away from the word Ásatrú itself and call themselves heathen instead. Even in modern English, the word heathen is not often associated with positive connotations. In the medieval period, the word was used to describe people who did not believe in the Christian God and to identify heretics who did not believe in the Christian God in the same way as the established churches. The traditionally Christian way of employing the word heathen comes from another word that is still used in modern English, pagan. The word has its origin in the Latin word pagus, village, which the early Christians in Rome used to refer to those who had not yet converted. To God-fearing Christians, pagan meant hillbilly, redneck, or backwards. When Christianity moved north and interacted with the Germanic-speaking peoples in northern Europe, the Latin word was quickly translated into the Germanic languages, and Christians in northern Europe began referring to non-Christians as heathens. Originally, the word heathen meant a person of the commons. The commons were the part of a local tribal territory that everyone could use if they needed to. This suggests that when pre-Christian Germanic peoples called someone heathen, it meant that they followed the customs and traditions of the community. With the emergence of Christianity, it changed to mean outsider and non-believer. Today, many who believe in the Norse gods call themselves heathens. In some ways, it is because they want to demonstrate to others that they do not believe in the Christian God, and in other ways, it is because many of them have reclaimed the old meaning and want to demonstrate that they believe in community. Heathens practice heathenry or heathenism, the old way, the traditional customs. To them, it is a positive word, and they share many commonalities in terms of beliefs and rituals with other neo-pagan groups, such as Wiccans and witches. The different ways of being heathen. When it comes to Ásatrú, there are many ways that one can be heathen. Some put strong focus on the æsir, others on the vanir, and yet others are more focused on ancestors and the spirits of the land. In Ásatrú, both in North America and Europe, there is often a tendency to focus on regions and countries of origin in Europe. Many Americans come to Ásatrú and heathenry because they have some ancestry from Northern Europe. Naturally, they take an interest in forging their heathen path with reference to where their ancestors came from. For instance, if someone has Norwegian ancestors and decides to practice heathenry, they often will be interested in how the spirituality was specifically practiced in Norway during ancient times. Yet there are also many who become Ásatrúar and heathens without having any ancestral ties to Scandinavia and Northern Europe, instead fashioning their beliefs in a more general sense, using the history, traditions, and literatures from the entire region as a backdrop for their beliefs. As a Scandinavian heathen, I am greatly honored to see that there are people of all races and ethnicities who find our customs and traditions valuable, and I welcome everyone to Ásatrú, regardless of their origin. In Europe, there are many different groups identifying as Ásatrú and heathens who specifically worship the Norse gods. You can find many such groups in Iceland and Scandinavia, the United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, and Austria, but there are also several in France, Spain, Italy, Poland, Finland, and the Baltic countries, and even Russia. Each group has their own unique way of being heathen. Often they identify with the history and tradition of Germanic peoples in their country and region. In Iceland, there is a well-known national group called Ásatrúarfélagið, the Ásatrúar community, and in Norway there are two organizations known as Fornsed, ancient custom, and Ásatrúfellesskapet Bifrost, the Ásatrú community Bifrost. In Sweden, there is Samfundet Fornsed Sverige, the community Ancient Custom Sweden, and Samfälligheten för Nordisk Sed, the community for Nordic customs, and in Denmark there is Fornsider, Ancient Custom, and Ásatrúfellesskapet I Danmark, the Ásatrúar community of Denmark. One thing you may notice is that several of the groups use the term Fornsed or Fornsider, which means ancient custom. This is also a common way of referring to being heathen or Ásatrúar in Scandinavia. In the UK and in North America, there are groups that identify as Anglo-Saxon heathens rather than Ásatrú. These groups are more focused on the pre-Christian past of the Germanic tribes, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who founded Anglo-Saxon England. In the Netherlands and in North America, there are also groups that identify with the Frisians, an ethnic minority that still lives along the coast that stretches from the Netherlands to Denmark. In Germany, there are many groups that identify with local tribes and peoples that historically have been present in a particular region there. This is also the case to an extent in Belgium and France. In France, Spain, and Italy, some groups identify with the Germanic peoples who migrated into those areas some 1,500 years ago: the Franks, Salians, Burgundians, Alemans, Goths, and Langobards. A religion or spirituality. You may have noticed by now that it is not easy to say that Ásatrúar and heathens just represent one group, belief, or way of seeing the world. There are many different groups that define what it means to be heathen in their own way. The same is true for whether you use the word religion to define and understand Ásatrú. For the purposes of this book, I have decided to use the word spirituality rather than religion. The word religion often carries the sense of a church with a priesthood and dogma, and that is not at all what heathenry is. Heathenry is a non-dogmatic community belief, which means there is no scripture that a member or believer must follow, and there are no clergy and priests who hold authority. Every group has their own way, their own rules, and their own leaders. Ásatrúarfélagið in Iceland has a board of directors and an allsherjargoði, a spiritual leader. Allsherjargoði means all regions priest. If it is masculine, the word for priest is spelled Gothi, and when it is feminine, the word is spelled Gyfja. There are also local Gothar and Githur in Iceland who are in charge of leading rituals. The word is also used in the other Scandinavian countries where it is typically spelled Gode/Goder and Gydje/Gydjer. Since the Icelandic Ásatrú community was founded in 1972, they have had 4 Allsherjargothar, the founder, Sveinbjörn Beinteinsson, who served until his death in December 1993, Jörmundur Ingi, who served until 2002 when he was relieved of duty by the board of directors. Jónína Kristin Berg was interim Allsherjargithja after him, and Hilmar Örn Hilmarsson was elected in 2003 and has been in charge since. In other countries, the structures are notably different. In Denmark and Norway, the Ásatrú organizations pride themselves on strong democratic structures. Ásatrú Fellesskapet Bifrost in Norway, for instance, elects all members of office and has no supreme spiritual leader. In Denmark, the organization Fornsider has an elected board with a president, but each year they also elect a thuler, a spiritual leader who only serves a 1-year term. In Fornsider, however, any member can be a gode or gidja and perform ceremonies such as weddings by obtaining a time-limited permit. In the United States, the major organization, the Troth, has a high reed, or a high council, consisting of elected members. The organization also has stewards who represent the organization locally, from Hawaii to as far away as Germany. The group additionally has elders who attained their honorific title through a minimum of a decade of service and who enjoy some respect as a clergy. As you can see, there are many variations in how Ásatrúar and heathens decide to congregate and practice their beliefs in an organized way. Ásatrúar and heathens believe in the Norse gods in many different ways, and they do not always agree on how you should practice these beliefs. Ásatrú is first and foremost a personal spirituality that Ásatrúar formulate themselves. Many practitioners are solitary or only practice in a tight-knit group of family and friends. They do not necessarily think that they need an organization or the trappings of an established religion to practice their beliefs. What brings all these groups together? At a very basic level, they are united by the importance of the Germanic and Norse gods. But the way that people believe in the Germanic Norse gods differs widely. In North America and some places in Europe, people who identify as Ásatrú and heathen often believe in the existence of the Germanic Norse gods in the same way that Christians and Muslims believe in their gods. However, in Scandinavia, and particularly in Iceland, the number of people who would say that they definitively believe in the Germanic Norse gods is very low. In a 2006-7 study of Ásatrú in Iceland, only 2% of those surveyed said they believed in the gods. While there are certainly people who believe in the gods in Scandinavia, it is important to understand that belief is not the most important part of being Ásatrú and heathen. This may be difficult to comprehend because you are likely accustomed to the idea that belief is an important part of being religious or of having spirituality. For Ásatrúar and heathens, belief is less important than how you live your life. Many would say the idea that belief is central belongs to Abrahamic religions, but not as much to the heathen spiritualities. Your actions count more than your words and your thoughts, and for many Ásatrúar and heathens, it is more important that you do what is best for your family, your community, and yourself than it is to believe a certain way. The origin of Ásatrú. Long before Abrahamic religions, people across Europe, Asia, and the entire world believed in many different gods. The belief in many gods is called polytheism, and sometimes also animism. When we reference polytheism, we're often referring to beliefs like the ancient Greek and Roman religions, whereas animism is often used to describe religions that are less organized and more tribal, in the sense that they did not unfold in urban settings. There are other differences between polytheism and animism, but that is the most important one. To better understand Ásatrú in the 21st century, I will have to take you on a historical journey of religion in Europe. The Stone Age. In the Mesolithic period, the part of the Stone Age before the introduction of farming in Europe, religion was focused on hunting practices. For instance, shamans would perform rituals to provide a generous hunt. Rituals and beliefs were centered around the important components of subsisting: gathering food, birth, illness, being initiated into a role in life, forming personal relationships, and, of course, death. The beliefs and rituals did not disappear in the Neolithic period when farming was introduced in Europe, but they probably became more complex as society also became more complex. Around 8,000 years ago, the first evidence of farming appeared in southern Europe. Farming spread from Anatolia in modern-day Turkey through Greece and the Balkans to the Italian peninsula and northward. With farming, new rituals were introduced. People began to sacrifice animals and offer portions of their food and drink to gods that were in control of the fertility of the fields, crops, and harvest. Society became more complex as people gathered in urban centers. With urbanism came new forms of government, city-states, and new life roles that people could take on. In spite of this, many aspects of the old hunter-gatherer lifestyle persisted. They were not simply abandoned as civilization evolved. Farming was introduced to northern Europe between 6,000 and 4,000 years ago, depending on the region. This was the period when Scandinavians learned how to farm, and this would also be the time when their religion developed with a similar level of complexity as in the southern parts of Europe, but without the urban centers. During this period, at least parts of the religion that would later be the religion for the Vikings, for instance, came into existence. What is not solidly grasped is what form it took, how it was practiced, and what beliefs people held. One of the most evident developments during the period was that burial mounds became widely used as community graves. The tradition of burying either one or more people in burial mounds persisted in Scandinavia until its people converted to Christianity about 1,000 years ago. The Bronze Age. The Bronze Age came to northern Europe and Scandinavia around 1700 to 500 BCE. The introduction of bronze as a new material to make tools and weapons changed the ways people conducted trade, built structures, and practiced religion. In Scandinavian archaeological remains from this period, we see ceremonial axes, swords, helmets with horns, and the procession horns called lures. During the same time, Scandinavians made rock carvings. The rock carvings feature scenes of people hunting, plowing fields, sailing, and performing rituals. What especially stands out in the rock carvings are the depictions of people rowing canoe-like boats, as well as a large figure that holds a hammer or axe in front of him. This figure is depicted in multiple carvings, and it looks very similar to Thor, the thunder god. A new feature of burials also appears: stone ship settings. It is clear that during this period in Scandinavia, a tribal warrior society became more dominant, and maritime pursuits became an important part of life. Religion in the Bronze Age both developed with society and lived side by side with ancient elements that had been part of life since the hunter cultures of the Stone Age. Gods and spirits in control of the fields and farming became part of religious life when farming was introduced, but when metal arrived in Scandinavia and northern Europe, new and more complex aspects of society developed. Specifically, it appears as though trade and territory developed a greater importance. It is possible that chieftains rose to power too, though they shared power with a tribal council or assembly. Still, such chieftains almost certainly would have had new ideas of rulership and gods attached to them. The Bronze Age was also a time when northern Europe saw greater integration with southern Europe, and a time that saw trade flourish. Ideas, gods, and spiritual concepts would certainly have migrated from south to north and influenced the way that Scandinavians saw their religions. The Celtic Iron Age. In Scandinavia, the Iron Age began around 500 BCE. The Iron Age saw the first evidence of the Germanic cultures in northern Europe. Celtic cultures had been spreading across Central Europe for some time, and their religious imprint on Scandinavian cultures is unmistakable. The Gunnestrup cauldron from northern Jutland in Denmark is a distinct Celtic artifact, depicting deities like the horned Cernunnos, the thunder god Tyrannus, and perhaps even Morgana, known from the Gallic tradition in France before the Roman invasions. Roman historians report being harassed by invading tribes from the north, such as the Cimbri, Ambrones, and Teutones during the period 105 to 101 BCE. In later geographic descriptions, the Jutland Peninsula is referred to as the Cimbrian Peninsula. Geographers and historians from the Roman Empire seem to agree that the Cimbri originated from the southern Scandinavian region. The tribal name of the Teutones is linguistically similar to the Proto-Germanic word Theudo, which meant people. This suggests that at least the Cimbri and Teutones may have been Germanic-speaking peoples, and their appearance in Roman literature in the last decade of the 2nd century BCE is the first evidence of Germanic tribes in European history. The Roman historians record that the people of the time sacrificed both humans and animals, which compares well with archaeological evidence of similar practices in Scandinavia during the same period of time. The Roman Iron Age. The Germanic peoples appear in Roman literature again in Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic Wars from the middle of the 1st century CE, but they emerge fully with the Roman writer Tacitus's ethnographic work Germania from circa 98 CE. The Romans referred to the land north of the Rhine as Germania, which is how the people from the region came to be known as Germanics or Germans. Tacitus described many interesting aspects of Northern European and Scandinavian religion. He mentioned that Germanic peoples had female leaders who could perform witchcraft. He described specific gods that the Germanic peoples worshipped, but he gave them Latin names. He particularly talked about Mercury, Odin, and Hercules/Jupiter, Thor. Tacitus also described a procession ritual with a wagon that carried a goddess named Nerthus around in the countryside on an island in the northern sea. Nerthus is etymologically the same name as Njörður, the god of seafaring in Norse mythology. The island in question could be one of the Danish islands. Around the same time that Tacitus wrote his account, people sacrificed several wagons in the water bodies in the Danish area. Tacitus also mentioned that they sacrificed humans in the lakes in Germania. There are several finds of sacrificed humans in the northern German area and the Danish area from the period of 0 to 600 CE. The bog bodies are well-preserved human bodies where skin, hair, and teeth have been preserved by the oxygen-free environment in the sludge found at the bottom of ancient lakes. The Migration Age. Runic inscriptions begin appearing circa 150 CE. While runes are simply a letter system like the alphabet, it is obvious that they were used in magical practices from the beginning. Warriors, religious authorities, chieftains, and kings were the ones who knew runes. In the beginning, runes were not for the common people. In the first 500 years CE, Germanic peoples migrated from northern Germany, Scandinavia, and the coastal regions of modern-day Poland. They traveled as far as Ukraine in the east, Greece and Bulgaria in the southeast, Spain and North Africa in the south, and the British Isles in the west. The Goths established kingdoms in Italy, France, and Spain. The Anglo-Saxons migrated to Britain and founded England. The Franks founded what would later become France. Traces of the precursor to the Viking Age religion are found in the cultures of the early migrating Germanic peoples, whose histories were written down in Latin in late antiquity. For instance, the Langobards, Longbeards, are said to have received their tribal name from Odin or Wotan. The Goths feature prominently in both runic inscriptions and in later medieval Nordic literature in Scandinavia. Both the Goths and the Heruli claimed origin in Thule, the Greco-Roman name for Scandinavia. When the Langobards destroyed the Herulian kingdom in what is now Austria and Hungary in the period around 495 to 508 CE, the remaining Heruli appear to have migrated back to Scandinavia. During the same period, around 500 CE, runic inscriptions with the name
Sample complete. Ready to continue?